Welcome back to 12 on Health. I met a woman in Stanford last year who was a lot of fun, great to talk to, and she told me she was writing a book. And then she emailed me the first chapter before the book was even done, and I read it on my laptop, and I was astonished to discover that what she had been through in her life. The book is If God Cares So Much, Why Do I Still Hurt? It's meant to be a practical guide to happiness. We have the author with us right now, Carrie Boschke, and when she's not busy raising her 3 children, Boschke often gives group talks to help others who want to move on to happy lives even after tragic experiences. When I first clicked on that email and opened that first chapter, I was standing in my kitchen thinking, I'm just going to quickly read this email. I had to take my laptop, go sit down, and continue reading. You got me.
Well, good to hear.
What happened? And this was now 8 years ago.
This was 8 years ago. I was 28 years old. I was married. I had a 7-week-old daughter, had a 7-year-old son, and my husband of 8 years committed suicide.
Did you find him?
No, luckily I did not find him. He had driven, we lived in Texas, and he had driven 300 miles away, and he committed suicide in a field.
Were there signs it was going to happen?
Not up until probably a day or two prior. So no, I had no warning. I had no warning that this was coming. It was all devastation. It was all shock.
So I met you 8 years later or 7 years later, and I would never, you don't realize if someone has a tragedy in their life or has overcome a tragedy in their life because you've rebuilt, and you rebuilt faster than most people I know. And I know a lot of how you did it is in this book. When were you able to get started in rebuilding your life?
Well, I started immediately, and it was not necessarily intentional. I was just so devastated and so lost that I had no place to go but up. And I was determined, mainly for the sake of my children, that I was going to overcome this, and that they were going to see something besides tragedy out of this tragic circumstance. I wanted to make my life count because, after surviving something like that, you realize that life is very fragile. And you know what? It's what we make of it. And we've got to make something of ourselves.
Yeah, I love your positive attitude.
Well, thank you.
And there were times when you hit lows, when you were still trying to get through that grief?
After Tommy's death, I actually became suicidal myself. So, the depression went very, very deep.
Did you get help from a psychiatrist?
I did. That was the problem. Because of what I was going through, I had such a hard time finding someone that could relate to me. I tried to go to therapists, and I tried to go to church, and I tried to go to my neighbors and my friends, and nobody got it. And, the whole point of, this is going to get better, this is going to get better. Well, people didn't understand. It wasn't going to get better. He wasn't coming home. This was a done deal. And I couldn't ask him questions. I couldn't find answers. I had no place to go except for inside of myself. And that's what I did. I immediately began to realize that if I was going to be happy, I had to stop depending on everyone else around me because I can't control any of that. And I had to learn how to look within.
That's interesting and great advice, I would think, for anyone, whether their tragedy was last year or 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
So it's time to say, I'm going to live, is what you're saying in your book. Changing destructive patterns, that's an entire chapter. Tell us what your destructive patterns were and how you were able to.
My destructive patterns were, I was always looking, like I said, I was always looking outside of myself for happiness. So I was depending on my friends to make me happy. I was depending on a few glasses of wine at the end of the day, or my relationship with my husband, or even, my children to bring me happiness. I was always looking outside of myself to find a fulfilling life, and the problem was I couldn't control any of that. I was always out of control, and therefore I was always out of control. And then, obviously, when it all blew up in my face and Tommy was gone and I had no place else to look.
Now, I know a lot of where you drew your strength is from religion, but a lot of it translates to practical living.
Well, it is practical living because it's not religion that got me through what I went through. It was my relationship with what I like to call God. It's relationship
It's whatever
with
you believe in.
It's what you believe in, and I realize that's a very broad subject, but there is a higher power that is living inside of us. And once we learn to hear it and focus on it and pay attention to it, and once we learn to acknowledge it, amazing things can happen. You will be encouraged in the midst of the most devastating circumstances. And when you realize that there is a voice that's actually trying to pull you out of it as opposed to ignoring you or feeling like God does not exist or he's not available, he's not there to help. He is. We just don't know how to hear him.
A lot of what you get into is, like we said, practical. We have to go to a break, but imparting some advice for someone who feels, oh, my life is, I've had tragedy, I can't go on. When they get up today, tomorrow, what do you want them to do? Any advice for them?
I want to take your first positive thought and I want you to focus on it. Write it down, pay attention to it, and don't ignore it. We ignore the positive thoughts and we pay so much attention to the negative when really the positive could be the truth.
I like that. Write it down.
Okay, I did.
Yes, you did, and it's like a whole bunch of pages. Thank you so much, Carrie Boschke. And this is her book. It's available on her website right now, which we have a link to at news12.com. It's pre-released, and it will be available at Amazon, etc. very soon. In just a moment, we'll have a car seat safety advice for parents preparing for a car crash with an infant on board. This is 12 on Health.